I still remember the exact moment the world stopped breathing. It was the day I buried my husband. The sky was unbearably gray, as if it, too, refused to carry light anymore. People often say that funerals feel heavy, but no one tells you how silence can scream. How every whisper, every footstep, every glance feels like a reminder that something irreversible has happened. I stood there, dressed in white, my hands trembling beneath the thin fabric of my dupatta. My fingers refused to stay still, as if they were searching for something. Perhaps his hand, the one that used to hold mine so firmly, like nothing in the world could pull us apart. But he was gone. They had lowered him into the ground, just moments before. And I hadn't cried yet. Not because I was strong, but because I was still waiting for him to wake up. People came and went, offering condolences I barely heard. Their lips moved, their eyes softened, but their words dissolved before reaching me. I nodded when I was supposed to nod. I lowered my gaze when I was supposed to grieve. Inside, there was only numbness. A terrifying, hollow numbness. My phone buzzed in my hand. At first, I ignored it. It felt almost disrespectful, this small, glowing screen interrupting the final moments of someone's existence. But it buzzed again. And again. Something inside me shifted. I don't know why I looked at it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was fate. Or maybe it was him. The message was from an unknown number. Just one line. I am still alive. Trust no one. For a second, my heart forgot how to beat. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and terror. I read it again. And again. I am still alive. Trust no one. My hands turned cold. The ground beneath me felt unsteady, like it might open and swallow me whole. I looked up instinctively, my eyes scanning the crowd. Faces. So many faces. Family, friends, distant relatives. But suddenly, they all felt unfamiliar. Like strangers, wearing the masks of people I knew. I turned toward the grave. The soil was still fresh. Still unsettled. Still holding him. Or was it? No, I whispered under my breath, my voice shaking. This isn't real. But the message was still there. It hadn't disappeared. It wasn't a mistake. A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to tell someone. I wanted to scream. But something inside me held me back. Trust no one. Those 3 words wrapped around my mind like chains. Who could I trust? My in-laws stood just a few steps away, their faces carved with sorrow. My mother clutched her shawl tightly, her eyes swollen from crying. My brother avoided my gaze as if grief had made him smaller. They all looked genuine. But what if they were? What if none of them were? I closed my eyes tightly, trying to steady myself. This had to be a cruel joke. Or maybe grief was finally breaking me. Yes, that must be it. People hallucinate, don't they? They imagine things. They hear voices. They see signs. Maybe this message was just my mind refusing to accept reality. But then, another message came. This time, my heart didn't just stop. It shattered. Don't cry for me, watch them. I gasped, the sound escaping before I could stop it. A few heads turned toward me. I quickly looked down, pretending to fix my dupatta, my fingers fumbling clumsily. Watch them. Who? Why? My chest tightened as panic began to seep into the cracks of my numbness. I needed air. I needed space. Without saying a word, I stepped away from the crowd, my feet moving on their own. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself was resisting me. I reached the far end of the graveyard, where the noise faded into a distant murmur. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. My hands shook violently as I unlocked my phone again. The messages were still there. Real. Unchanged. I typed a reply before I could stop myself. Who is this? My thumb hovered over the send button for a moment. What if I didn't want to know? What if the answer destroyed whatever was left of me? But I pressed send anyway. The message delivered instantly. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, my phone buzzed. I don't have much time. Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring the screen. No, I whispered, shaking my head. This isn't possible. I typed again, faster this time. Where are you? What is this? Who are you? The reply came almost immediately. They will come for you next. My breath hitched. The world tilted. 1,000 thoughts collided in my mind, none of them making sense. They. Who were they? And why would they come for me? I looked over my shoulder, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone could hear it. The graveyard suddenly felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. As if something unseen was watching. Every shadow seemed darker. Every movement felt suspicious. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold together the pieces that were beginning to fall apart. I typed again, my fingers trembling uncontrollably. Please, tell me what's happening. This time, the reply took longer. Seconds stretched into minutes. Each moment felt like an eternity. I stared at the screen, willing it to light up again. And then, it did. Act normal, say nothing, I will find you. A tear slipped down my cheek. Then another. And another. I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to suppress the sob that threatened to escape. If this was real, if he was really alive, then whose body had we just buried? And why? A voice called my name from a distance. I quickly wiped my tears and locked my phone, forcing my expression back into something that resembled grief instead of fear. I turned around slowly. They were all still there, waiting, watching. For the first time in my life, I was afraid of the people I loved. And as I walked back toward them, one thought echoed relentlessly in my mind. If he is alive, then the man I buried today was a lie. I walked back toward them with slow, careful steps, as if the ground beneath me had turned fragile and might crack if I moved too suddenly. Every face I looked at now felt different. Just moments ago, they were my people, my family, my support, but now each expression carried a question mark. Who among them was hiding something? Or worse, who among them already knew? My mother reached for my hand as I approached. Her fingers were warm, trembling slightly, her eyes searching my face. "Beta, are you okay?" she asked softly. I nodded immediately, too quickly. Yes, I just needed some air. My voice sounded unfamiliar to me, steady on the outside, but hollow underneath. She studied me for a moment longer, as if trying to read something deeper, but then she simply sighed and pulled me closer. "Be strong," she whispered. "You have to be strong now." Strong. The word echoed inside me like an empty promise. If only she knew what I had just read. If only she knew that the man we had buried might not even be my husband. My grip on her hand tightened for a second before I gently pulled away. I couldn't let her feel my fear. Not now. Not when I didn't even understand it myself. My eyes drifted toward my in-laws. My father-in-law stood near the grave, speaking to a few men, his face composed but distant. He had always been a quiet man, someone who spoke less and observed more. Today, however, his silence felt heavier, almost calculated. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, was crying openly, her shoulders shaking as she clutched a handkerchief in her hand. Anyone looking at her would see nothing but a grieving mother. But now, I wasn't sure what I was seeing anymore. Trust no one. The words repeated in my mind, like a warning I couldn't ignore. My brother stepped closer to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "We should leave soon," he said gently. "You've been standing here too long." I looked at him. Really looked at him. This was the same brother who had protected me since childhood, who had fought anyone who made me cry, who had promised my husband on our wedding day that he would always stand by me. But now, even he felt like a stranger. "Are you okay?" he asked again, noticing my silence. I forced a faint smile. "I'm fine." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't press further. Good. Because I didn't trust myself to answer anything without breaking. The rest of the rituals passed in a blur. People continued to come and go, prayers were offered, hands were shaken, words were exchanged. And through it all, I felt like I was watching someone else's life unfold. Not mine. Never mine. My phone remained clutched in my hand, hidden within the folds of my dupatta. I resisted the urge to check it every second, but my heart wouldn't stop racing. Would he message again? Or had I imagined everything? No, it was real. It had to be. When we finally began to leave the graveyard, I took one last look at the fresh mound of soil. A strange, unsettling thought crossed my mind. If he was alive, then someone else was buried there. Someone whose identity had been erased. Someone who had taken my husband's place in death. A chill ran through me. Who was that man? And why did he have to die? The car ride home felt suffocating. I sat in the back seat between my mother and my aunt, their soft whispers blending into a distant hum. My brother drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the road. No one noticed how tightly I was gripping my phone. No one noticed how my breathing had become uneven. No one noticed the storm building inside me. As we reached the house, a wave of exhaustion hit me. This house, our house, felt unfamiliar. Just yesterday, it had been filled with his laughter, his voice, his presence. Now, it felt like a place I didn't belong. Women from the neighborhood had already gathered inside, their murmurs filling the air. The scent of incense lingered heavily, mixing with the quiet sobs and whispered condolences. I stepped inside slowly, my feet hesitant. Every corner of this house held a memory. Every wall echoed his voice. And yet, something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it, but I could feel it. As I made my way to our room, my heart pounded harder with each step. This was the place where he had last been, where I had last seen him alive. Or at least, where I thought I had. I closed the door behind me, shutting out the noise from outside. Finally, I was alone. Or so I thought. My phone buzzed. I froze. Slowly, I looked down at the screen. Another message. My hands trembled as I opened it. "They are watching you." My breath caught in my throat. Instinctively, I turned around, scanning the room. The curtains were slightly drawn. The window was closed. The cupboard stood exactly as I had left it. Nothing seemed out of place. And yet, everything felt wrong. I quickly typed back. "Who are they? Where are you? Please tell me the truth." The reply came after a few seconds. "Check the drawer." My heart skipped a beat. The drawer. Which drawer? My eyes moved toward the bedside table. The same table where he used to keep his watch, his wallet, his small, everyday belongings. My steps were slow, hesitant. Every instinct in me screamed to stop. But I couldn't. I reached the table and stared at the drawer for a moment. My hand hovered over it. What if opening it changed everything? What if I wasn't ready for the truth? But it was already too late to turn back. With a trembling hand, I pulled the drawer open. Inside, everything looked normal at first glance. His watch, his cufflinks, a few folded papers. But then, I noticed it. A small black envelope. I frowned. I had never seen it before. My fingers shook as I picked it up. There was no name on it. No marking. Just a plain, black envelope. I swallowed hard and opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper. And a photograph. My hands nearly gave out as I looked at the picture. It was him. My husband. Standing beside another man I had never seen before. Both of them looked serious, tense, as if they were in the middle of something dangerous. On the back of the photograph, 3 words were written. Don't trust them. A wave of dizziness hit me. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. This wasn't just confusion anymore. This was something bigger, something darker. I unfolded the paper with trembling hands. There was a short message written in his handwriting. I would recognize it anywhere. If anything happens to me, do not believe what you see. They will lie. They will try to control everything. Find the truth before it finds you. Tears streamed down my face. This was real. All of it. The messages. The warning. The fear. He knew something. He was involved in something. And whatever it was, it had followed him to his grave. Or perhaps, it had never let him die. My phone buzzed again. I looked at the screen through blurred vision. Burn it now. I hesitated. This was the only proof I had. The only connection to the truth. But if he was telling me to destroy it, then it must be dangerous. My hands shook violently as I looked around the room. Then, slowly, I moved toward the small candle burning near the corner. I held the paper over the flame. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the edges began to curl. Darken. Disappear. Tears fell freely as I watched his words turn to ash. The photograph followed. Within seconds, everything was gone. As if it had never existed. As if he had never tried to warn me. I dropped the burnt remains into the tray, my body trembling uncontrollably. My phone buzzed one last time. I looked at the message. Good, now listen carefully. Your life depends on it. I sank onto the floor, my strength finally giving out. Whatever this was, it had only just begun. I sat there on the cold floor, my back pressed against the edge of the bed, my hands still trembling from the ashes I had just created with my own fingers. And for the first time since the morning, the numbness inside me cracked open, and something far more dangerous took its place. Fear that was alive, sharp, and watching everything around me as if the walls themselves had ears. And I realized I couldn't even trust my own breathing, because it sounded too loud in the silence of the room, too revealing, too real. And my eyes kept drifting to the door, half expecting it to open at any moment with someone standing there, smiling softly, pretending nothing was wrong while hiding everything that was. My phone rested in my lap, the screen still glowing faintly from the last message, and I stared at it as if it might suddenly show me his face instead of those haunting words. Because a part of me still refused to accept this reality. A part of me still wanted to believe that grief had twisted my mind into imagining all of this. But the smell of burnt paper lingered in the air, thick and undeniable, reminding me that something real had just been destroyed, something he had left behind for me. Something I would never be able to show anyone even if I wanted to. And maybe that was the point. Maybe he knew I wouldn't be safe if I kept it. Maybe he knew that even possession of the truth was dangerous in a world where lies had already buried him alive. I forced myself to stand up, my legs weak beneath me, and I walked slowly toward the mirror, needing to see what I looked like now because I didn't feel like the same person who had walked into this room. And when my reflection met my eyes, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me, her face pale, her eyes wide and restless, her lips trembling as if they were trying to form questions that had no answers, and I touched my cheek gently, almost expecting my reflection to disappear. Almost expecting this to all fade away, but it didn't. It stayed, solid and terrifying, and I knew then that whatever was happening, I was already inside it, already a part of something I didn't understand. A knock on the door made my heart leap violently in my chest, and I turned so quickly it made me dizzy, my mind racing with possibilities, each one worse than the last. And for a second I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even think of who it might be or what they might want. And then my mother's voice came softly from the other side, calling my name, gentle and familiar. And yet even that comfort felt fragile now, like something that could break if I trusted it too much. And I quickly wiped my face, trying to erase every trace of what I had just experienced, because I didn't know who was watching, I didn't know who could see through me, and I couldn't afford to make a single mistake. I opened the door slowly, forcing my expression into something manageable, something expected, and she stepped inside with worried eyes, her gaze immediately scanning my face as if searching for the pieces I was trying so hard to hide. And she reached out to hold my shoulders, her touch warm and grounding. But even then, a small voice inside me whispered the same warning again. Trust no one. And I hated that voice. I hated what it was doing to me, because this was my mother. The one person who had never given me a reason to doubt her, and yet now doubt had planted itself everywhere, growing quietly, dangerously, and I nodded when she asked if I was all right. I spoke when she told me to rest. I even managed a faint smile when she brushed my hair back from my face. But inside, I was unraveling thread by thread. After she left, I locked the door this time, something I had never done before in this house, and that small action felt like crossing an invisible line, like admitting to myself that I was no longer safe even here, and I leaned against the door for a moment, listening to the faint sounds outside, trying to pick up anything unusual, any sign that something was wrong. But everything sounded normal, too normal, and that in itself felt suspicious now. Because how could the world continue, as if nothing had changed, when everything inside me had already shifted beyond recognition? I walked back to the bed slowly and sat down, my mind replaying every word from the messages, every line from the letter I had burned, every detail from the photograph, trying to piece them together into something that made sense. But the more I thought about it, the more questions appeared, multiplying faster than I could answer them, and one question stood above all the others, louder, heavier, impossible to ignore. If he was alive, then where was he, and why wasn't he here? Why wasn't he with me? Why was he hiding instead of holding me through the worst day of my life? And that question hurt more than anything else, because beneath the fear and confusion, there was still love, still longing, still a desperate need to believe that he hadn't left me alone in this world, not like this, not without explanation. My phone remained silent for what felt like hours, and that silence was unbearable in its own way, because it left me alone with my thoughts, alone with the growing realization that I was now part of something I didn't choose, something I couldn't escape, and I kept checking the screen again and again, hopping for another message, dreading it at the same time, trapped between wanting answers and fearing them, until finally, just as the light outside began to fade and shadows stretched across the room. The phone buzzed again, and my heart jumped so violently it almost hurt, and I grabbed it immediately, my fingers cold as I opened the message, my eyes scanning the words that would change everything once again. Tonight you will hear something. Do not react. Do not open the door, no matter what happens. And I froze, the words sinking into me slowly, heavily, and a deep, unsettling feeling settled in my chest, because whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be something I was ready for. The message stayed on my screen long after I read it, as if the words had carved themselves into my mind and refused to leave, and I kept staring at it, reading it over and over again, trying to understand what something meant, trying to prepare myself for a moment I couldn't even imagine. And the more I thought about it, the heavier the air in the room became, pressing down on me like an invisible weight, making it harder to breathe, harder to think, harder to remain calm. Night came slowly, but it felt too fast at the same time, like the hours slipped through my fingers without permission. And before I knew it, darkness had settled outside the windows, wrapping the house in an eerie stillness that made every small sound feel louder, sharper, more significant, and I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands clasped tightly together in my lap, my eyes fixed on the door as if I could somehow predict what was about to happen just by watching it closely enough. The house, which had been filled with people and quiet murmurs during the day, began to empty as relatives and neighbors slowly left, their voices fading into the distance, leaving behind a silence that didn't feel peaceful, but watchful, like something was waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And I could hear faint movements from other rooms, footsteps, doors closing, low voices. But none of it reassured me anymore, none of it felt safe, because every sound now carried a question. Every movement held a possibility I didn't understand. I checked my phone again, hopping for another message, hopping for more instructions, something clearer, something that could help me prepare. But there was nothing, just the last warning staring back at me, cold and final, and I realized that whatever was going to happen tonight, I would have to face it alone, without guidance, without answers. and that realization sent a shiver through my entire body. I stood up slowly and walked toward the door, my steps hesitant, my hand lifting slightly as if drawn by an invisible force, and I stared at the handle for a long moment, wondering if I should lock it again, wondering if that would make any difference at all. And then I turned the lock firmly, the small click echoing louder than it should have, and I stepped back, my heart beating faster, because that simple act made everything feel more real, more serious, more dangerous. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. I couldn't tell anymore. Time had lost its meaning in the tension that filled the room, and I sat there in silence, listening, waiting, my senses heightened to the point where even the faintest creak of the house made my body tense, my breath catching as I tried to identify every sound, trying to separate normal from abnormal, safe from unsafe, but nothing felt certain anymore, nothing felt clear. And then it started. A sound, soft at first, almost too quiet to notice, like something being dragged slowly across the floor somewhere outside my room, and I froze instantly, every muscle in my body going rigid, my eyes locking onto the door as my breath became shallow and uneven. And the sound came again, slightly louder this time, more deliberate, more real, and I felt my heartbeat pounding in my ears so loudly it almost drowned everything else out. My first instinct was to move, to go closer, to listen more carefully, to understand what was happening. But the message echoed in my mind. Do not react, and I forced myself to stay still, even as every part of me screamed to do something, anything, and I pressed my hands tightly against my knees to stop them from shaking. The sound continued, slow, dragging, moving closer, and then it stopped completely, leaving behind a silence so thick it felt suffocating. And for a moment, I wondered if it had all been in my head, if fear had created something that wasn't really there. But then, a soft knock came at the door. My entire body jolted. It wasn't loud. It wasn't aggressive. It was gentle, almost careful, like someone who didn't want to disturb me too much. And that somehow made it worse because it felt intentional, controlled. And I stared at the door without moving, my breathing shallow, my chest tight, as the knock came again, slightly firmer this time. "Open the door," a voice said quietly from the other side, and my heart nearly stopped because the voice. It sounded familiar, painfully familiar, like something I had heard 1,000 times before, something that belonged to my memories, something that shouldn't have been standing outside my door right now. "It's me," the voice added, softer now, almost pleading, and my vision blurred with sudden tears as recognition hit me like a wave, because that voice. It was his, it sounded exactly like him, every tone, every pause, every subtle emotion woven into it, and my entire body leaned forward instinctively, drawn toward the door by a force stronger than fear, stronger than logic, stronger than anything I could control. My hand lifted slightly, trembling as it reached toward the handle, my mind spinning, my heart screaming his name even though my lips stayed sealed. And for a moment, everything else disappeared, every warning, every doubt, every message, leaving behind only the desperate hope that somehow, impossibly, he was really there, that he had come back, that everything would make sense if I just opened the door. But then the words crashed back into my mind. "Do not open the door, no matter what happens," and I froze, my fingers hovering just inches away from the handle, my entire body shaking as two forces pulled me in opposite directions, one driven by love and longing, the other by fear and instinct, and I stood there trapped between them, unable to move forward, unable to step back, as the voice outside spoke again, softer now, almost breaking. "Please, it's me. Open the door," and a tear slipped down my cheek as I closed my eyes tightly, my hand slowly retreating from the handle, my breath uneven and painful, because something deep inside me, something I couldn't explain, whispered a truth I didn't want to accept. If he was truly alive, then he wouldn't be asking me to open the door like this. My hand fell back to my side, heavy and lifeless, as if it no longer belonged to me, and I stood there frozen, my back to the door, my eyes tightly shut, trying to block out the voice that continued to call for me from the other side, trying to convince me, trying to pull me in, and every word it spoke felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest because it wasn't just any voice. It was his voice, the exact tone, the exact softness. The exact way he used to say my name when he wanted me to listen, when he wanted me to trust him, And that familiarity was more terrifying than anything else because it meant whoever, or whatever, was out there knew him well enough to become him. "Please, don't do this," the voice said again, quieter now, almost fragile, and I felt my knees weaken beneath me, my body betraying me as it leaned slightly toward the door again, drawn by a love that refused to die even when everything else had shattered. And for a moment, I hated myself for hesitating, for doubting, for not opening the door immediately, because what if it really was him? What if he had come back and I was abandoning him in his moment of need? What kind of wife would that make me? What kind of love was this if I couldn't even open a door for him? And my heart screamed at me to turn around, to unlock it, to throw it open and fall into his arms, to feel him, to know he was real, to end this unbearable uncertainty once and for all. But then the other voice inside me, the one shaped by those messages, the one sharpened by fear and warning, pushed back harder, louder, reminding me of every word I had read, every sign I had seen, every unnatural detail that didn't fit into the world I thought I knew. And I forced myself to breathe, slow and steady, even though it felt like my lungs were collapsing, even though every breath burned, and I pressed my palms against my ears, trying to shut him out, trying to protect whatever fragile control I still had left. The knocking grew slightly louder, more urgent now, but still controlled, still careful, as if it didn't want to draw attention, as if it knew exactly how far it could go without raising suspicion. And that realization sent a cold wave through my body. Because this wasn't desperation, this wasn't panic, this was something calculated, something aware, something that understood me well enough to push just the right buttons, to use just the right tone, to break me slowly instead of forcing me. "You're making a mistake," the voice said, no longer pleading but firm now, and the shift in tone made my stomach twist because it sounded less like him in that moment, less like the man I loved and more like something wearing his voice like a mask, something slipping, revealing itself in small, unsettling ways. I opened my eyes slowly, staring straight ahead at the wall, refusing to turn around, refusing to give in, and I whispered under my breath, barely audible even to myself, "If it's really you, you wouldn't be here like this." And the moment those words left my lips, the knocking stopped completely. Silence fell again, heavy and suffocating, pressing in from all sides, and for a few seconds I wondered if it was over, if whatever had been outside had finally gone, if I had passed some kind of test without even knowing it, and my body sagged slightly with a fragile sense of relief. But it didn't last, because just as quickly as the silence came, it was broken by something far worse. A faint sound echoed from the other side of the door. Not knocking this time, not footsteps, but something slower, something deliberate like fingers dragging lightly across the wood, tracing patterns I couldn't see, and my skin crawled as I imagined it, as I pictured something standing there, right on the other side, inches away from me, separated only by a thin barrier that suddenly felt far too weak, far too temporary. My breath hitched again, and I stepped back instinctively, putting distance between myself and the door, my heart racing uncontrollably as the sound continued, soft but persistent, like a reminder that it was still there, still waiting, still aware of me. Then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, it spoke again. But this time, the voice wasn't his. It was still similar, still close enough to send chills down my spine, but there was something off about it now, something hollow, something empty behind the words, as if the emotion had been stripped away, leaving behind only imitation. "You should have opened the door," it said quietly, and the calmness in its tone terrified me more than any anger could have, because it sounded certain, confident, like it knew something I didn't, like it had already planned what would happen next. I felt my legs shaking as I backed further into the room, my eyes locked on the door as if expecting it to move, to break, to reveal whatever stood behind it, and I reached blindly for my phone, my fingers fumbling until they wrapped around it, and I looked down quickly, hopping, begging for another message, for some guidance, some reassurance that I had done the right thing, and as if responding to my desperation, the screen lit up. "Good, you didn't open it." A sob escaped my lips, sharp and uncontrollable, and I sank onto the bed, my body trembling as relief and fear collided inside me, because I knew then that whatever had been outside my door, it wasn't him, it couldn't have been him, no matter how much it sounded like him, no matter how much it tried to convince me, and the realization left a deep, aching emptiness in my chest, because it meant one thing with absolute certainty. He was still out there somewhere, alive, hidden, and whatever was happening around me was only a small part of something much bigger, something far more dangerous than I had imagined. My phone buzzed again before I could even process the thought fully, and I looked at the new message with shaking hands. "They're testing you. Don't fail again." I stared at the message for a long time, my vision blurring as the words settled deep inside me, heavier than anything I had felt before, and the phrase kept repeating in my mind. "Don't fail again." As if it carried a meaning I hadn't fully understood yet, as if it wasn't just a warning but a reminder that something worse could happen if I made the wrong move next time. And I pressed the phone tightly against my chest, closing my eyes as I tried to steady my breathing, but the fear refused to settle. It only shifted, growing quieter, colder, more controlled, like it was learning to live inside me instead of overwhelming me all at once. The silence outside my room stretched endlessly after that. No more knocking, no more voices, no more movement, but it didn't feel like safety. It felt like pause, like whatever had come to my door had simply stepped back into the shadows, waiting for another moment, another chance. And I knew I wouldn't sleep, not tonight, not after what I had heard, not after what I had almost done. And I sat there in the dim light, my back against the wall now, my knees pulled close to me. As if making myself smaller could somehow make me less visible, less vulnerable. Hours passed slowly, painfully, each minute dragging itself forward as I listened to the house breathe around me, every creak of wood, every shift of air making my body tense. And at some point, exhaustion began to creep in, not enough to let me sleep, but enough to make my thoughts blur at the edges, enough to make reality feel slightly distant, like I was watching everything from just outside myself. And I wondered how long I could keep going like this, how long I could stay alert, careful, controlled. Before something inside me broke completely. Just before dawn, when the sky outside began to lighten faintly, I must have drifted for a few minutes, not fully asleep but not fully awake either, caught in that fragile space where thoughts turn into fragments and time loses shape. And it was there in that quiet in-between that I heard something again. Not from outside my door this time, but from inside the house, deeper, further away. A low murmur of voices that didn't belong to mourning, that didn't belong to grief or routine. And my eyes snapped open instantly, my body stiffening as I listened more carefully, my heart beginning to race again despite the exhaustion weighing it down. The voices were faint, but they were real, and they weren't casual. They weren't the soft, tired conversations of family members waking up after a long night. They were hushed, urgent, deliberate, as if whoever was speaking didn't want to be heard. And that alone was enough to send a fresh wave of unease through me, because nothing about this house felt normal anymore. Nothing felt safe enough to ignore. And I slowly pushed myself up from the floor, my movements careful, silent, as I stepped closer to my door. My breath held unconsciously as I tried to listen without making a sound. The floor beneath my feet felt colder than usual, the air heavier, and I placed my hand lightly against the door, not to open it, not yet, but to steady myself as I leaned in slightly, focusing on the faint voices drifting through the walls, trying to catch words, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. But it was too distant, too muffled, and frustration mixed with fear as I realized I couldn't understand anything clearly from here, and a part of me wanted to step out, to move closer, to find the source of those voices and finally get some answers. But the memory of the night before stopped me, holding me back, reminding me how easily I could be pulled into something I wasn't ready to face. I stepped away from the door again, packing the room slowly, my mind racing with possibilities, each one darker than the last, and I looked down at my phone, hesitating for a moment before unlocking it, hopping, almost expecting another message to guide me, to tell me what to do next. But the screen remained empty, silent, leaving me alone with my choices once again, and I realized that whatever was happening now, I would have to decide for myself whether to stay hidden or step into the unknown. The voices continued, faint but persistent, and after a few minutes I couldn't take it anymore. The need to know became stronger than the fear of what I might find, and I moved toward the door again, my hand reaching for the lock, my fingers trembling slightly as I paused, listening one last time, making sure there was no sound right outside, no presence waiting for me like before, and when I heard nothing but distant murmurs, I slowly turned the lock. The soft click sending a sharp pulse through my chest. I opened the door just a little at first, barely enough to look through, my eyes scanning the hallway cautiously, and everything seemed normal, empty, quiet, but the voices were clearer now, coming from downstairs from the far end of the house, and I stepped out slowly, my feet careful against the floor, each step measured, controlled, as I moved toward the staircase, my heart pounding louder with every inch I covered. The closer I got, the clearer the voices became, and I recognized them then, sending a shock through me that made me stop mid-step, my breath catching in my throat as I listened more closely. Because those voices, they belonged to people I knew, people I trusted, people who had stood beside me just hours ago at the graveyard, mourning, comforting, grieving, and now they were speaking in low, tense tones, their words slipping through the silence like secrets that were never meant to be heard. I moved closer, staying hidden in the shadows near the staircase, my body pressed lightly against the wall as I listened, my heart racing uncontrollably as fragments of their conversation began to reach me, incomplete but enough to unsettle everything inside me. "We need to finish this quickly," one voice said, firm and controlled, and I froze, my mind struggling to place it, to accept it. "She doesn't know anything yet," another voice replied, quieter but tense, and a cold wave spread through me at those words because they were talking about me. They had to be, there was no one else it could be, and my hands clenched at my sides as I leaned in just a little more, desperate to hear everything now, no matter the risk. "That's the problem," the first voice said again, sharper this time. "If she finds out, everything falls apart." My breath became shallow, uneven, and I pressed my hand against my mouth to stop any sound from escaping, my entire body trembling as the truth began to take shape in the most terrifying way possible. Because it wasn't just fear anymore, it wasn't just suspicion, it was confirmation. Something was happening, something planned, something hidden, and I was at the center of it without even knowing why. "We should have handled it yesterday," the second voice muttered, frustration slipping through, and my heart dropped at those words. Because yesterday was the day my husband died, or the day I was told he died, and a sickening realization twisted inside me as the pieces began to connect in ways I didn't want to understand. "It's done," the first voice snapped quietly. "Focus on what comes next." Silence followed for a moment, heavy and loaded with meaning, and I stood there, barely breathing, barely thinking, as my entire world shifted again, because whatever they had done, whatever they were planning, it wasn't over yet. I stood there frozen in the shadows, my back pressed against the cold wall, my heartbeat pounding so loudly I was certain it would give me away. And every word I had just heard echoed inside me like a cruel confirmation of everything I had begun to fear. And yet a part of me still resisted it, still tried to deny it, because accepting it meant accepting that the people standing just a few steps away from me were not who I thought they were, that the grief we had shared was not real, that the tears I had seen were nothing more than carefully performed illusions. My fingers curled tightly into my palms as I forced myself to listen, to stay still, to not let my fear push me into making a mistake, because I understood now that one wrong move could cost me everything. And I leaned slightly closer, my breath shallow, my entire body tense as the voices resumed, quieter now, more cautious, as if they sensed something shifting in the air. "We don't have much time," the second voice said, and this time I recognized it clearly, sending a sharp jolt through my chest, because it belonged to my brother, the same brother who had just hours ago held my shoulder and told me to be strong, the same brother I had trusted without question my entire life. And the realization hit me so hard I had to grip the wall to steady myself, my vision blurring for a second as disbelief and betrayal collided inside me. "She's already acting strange," he continued, his tone low but uneasy, and I felt something inside me shatter quietly because he wasn't worried about me, not in the way I had believed. He was watching me, analyzing me as if I were part of a problem he needed to solve. "Grief does that," the first voice replied, calm and dismissive, and I shifted slightly to see better, my eyes narrowing as I focused on the figures standing in the dim light below. And when I saw him clearly, my breath caught in my throat again, because the man speaking was my father-in-law. A cold, suffocating realization wrapped itself around me as I stared at him, at the same man who had stood beside the grave with quiet composure, who had accepted condolences with solemn nods, who had looked every bit like a grieving father. And yet now his posture was different, his expression sharper, his voice carrying a control that didn't belong to morning. And in that moment, I understood that whatever this was, it went deeper than I had imagined. "I don't trust it," my brother said again, his voice tighter now, and I felt my chest tighten in response. Because the words cut differently now, they weren't protective, they weren't caring, they were suspicious, calculating, and I realized he wasn't talking about my well-being. He was talking about my awareness, about whether I knew something I wasn't supposed to know. "You worry too much," my father-in-law replied, his tone almost amused, and that small hint of emotion, that slight shift, made something inside me turn cold, because it revealed a confidence that could only come from control, from certainty, from knowing exactly how everything would unfold. "Everything is under control." Under control. The words echoed in my mind like a threat, and I pressed myself further into the shadows, afraid that even my presence in this moment could disrupt whatever fragile balance I had stumbled into, and I held my breath as the conversation continued, each word tightening the knot of fear in my chest. "And the body?" my brother asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper, and my entire world seemed to stop for a second as those words reached me, because I knew, deep down, exactly what he was referring to, even before the answer came. "Disposed of properly," my father-in-law said calmly, and I felt the ground beneath me disappear, because that was it, that was the confirmation I had been dreading, the final piece that made everything real in the most horrifying way possible, because it meant the man we had buried was not my husband. It meant someone else had taken his place. Someone else had been used, erased, and I felt a wave of nausea rise inside me as I struggled to process the weight of that truth. "And him?" my brother asked next, and my heart began to race uncontrollably again, because there was only one person he could be referring to now, only one question that mattered more than anything else. A brief pause followed, heavy and deliberate, and I leaned forward slightly, desperate for the answer, my entire body trembling with anticipation and fear. "He's where he needs to be," my father-in-law said finally, his voice quieter now but no less controlled, and the vagueness of it sent a chill through me, because it didn't confirm safety, it didn't confirm danger. It only confirmed one thing: he was alive, and they knew exactly where he was. My mind spun wildly, trying to make sense of it, trying to understand why any of this was happening, why they would fake his death, why they would involve me in something so twisted, and the questions piled up faster than I could process them, each one heavier than the last. "We can't keep this going forever," my brother said after a moment, and there was something different in his tone now, something strained, something uncertain, and for a brief second I wondered if there was still a part of him that hesitated, that questioned, but it didn't matter because he was still here, still part of this, still standing on the other side of whatever line I had just crossed. "We don't need forever," my father-in-law replied, his voice firm again, final, leaving no room for doubt. "We just need enough time." Silence fell between them after that, thick and loaded with meaning, and I stood there, barely able to breathe, barely able to think, as the reality of my situation settled over me like a shadow I couldn't escape, because I understood now that I wasn't just a widow mourning her husband. I was a piece in something far more dangerous, something carefully planned, something already in motion, and the most terrifying part was that I didn't know my role in it yet. I took a slow step back, my body moving on instinct, telling me to get away, to return to my room, to hide before I was discovered, and I turned carefully, my movements as silent as I could make them, my heart still pounding violently in my chest as I began to retreat toward the staircase. But just as I placed my foot on the first step, a floorboard creaked softly beneath me, and the sound, though small, felt deafening in the silence, and I froze instantly, my breath catching in my throat as the voices below stopped completely. For a moment, there was nothing, no movement, no sound, just a heavy, suffocating pause, and then I heard it, the slow, deliberate shift of footsteps, followed by my father-in-law's voice, calm but sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. "Did you hear that?" My entire body went rigid at his words. The air caught somewhere between my lungs and my throat, refusing to move, refusing to let me breathe, and I stood there on the staircase, one foot slightly raised, completely frozen, as if even the smallest movement would betray me, and I could hear it then. The faint shift of their positions below, the subtle change in the silence that told me they were no longer just talking, they were listening, searching. trying to confirm whether what they had heard was real or just a trick of the house settling in the early morning quiet. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain it would echo down the stairs and expose me, and I pressed my hand tightly against my chest as if I could physically silence it, my mind racing with panic, trying to decide what to do, whether to move forward or backward or not at all. And every option felt dangerous. Every possibility felt like a risk I couldn't afford to take. "Probably nothing," my brother said after a few seconds, but his voice lacked conviction now. It carried a slight tension that hadn't been there before, and I could hear it clearly, the uncertainty, the doubt, and that made everything worse, because it meant he wasn't convinced. It meant he was already alert, already suspicious, and I knew I had to get out of there before that suspicion turned into action. I slowly lowered my raised foot back onto the step, as gently as I could, controlling every movement with painful precision, and I began to step back, inch by inch, my body trembling with the effort of staying silent, of staying invisible. And for a moment, it felt like I might actually make it, like I might reach the top of the stairs and disappear back into my room before they decided to check. But then another sound betrayed me, a faint brush of fabric against the railing. So soft it might have gone unnoticed in any other moment, but not now, not in this silence, not when they were already listening for anything out of place. The reaction below was immediate, a sharp intake of breath followed by the unmistakable sound of movement, faster this time, more decisive, and my father-in-law's voice came again, no longer calm, no longer dismissive, but firm and commanding. "Someone's there." Panic surged through me like a sudden storm, and whatever control I had been holding onto shattered instantly, replaced by a desperate need to escape, to get away before they reached me, before they saw me, before everything changed in a way I couldn't undo. And I turned quickly, abandoning caution, my feet moving faster now as I rushed up the remaining steps, my breath uneven and loud despite my efforts to stay quiet. And I didn't look back. I couldn't look back, because I knew if I did, I might freeze again, and this time I wouldn't get another chance. I reached the hallway and ran straight to my room, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it quickly behind me but not slamming it, not making more noise than I already had. And I locked it immediately, the click echoing in my ears like a final line of defense, even though I wasn't sure it would actually protect me if they decided to come after me. I stepped back from the door, my chest rising and falling rapidly, my entire body trembling as I tried to quiet myself, to slow my breathing, to erase any sign that I had just been running. Because if they came to check, if they knocked, if they called my name, I needed to be ready. I needed to appear exactly as they expected. Grieving, exhausted, unaware. The footsteps outside came sooner than I expected, heavy but controlled, moving down the hallway toward my room, and I felt my heart leap into my throat as I stared at the door, my mind screaming at me to do something, anything, to hide the truth of where I had been. And I quickly moved to the bed, sitting down and pulling the edge of the blanket around me, trying to make it look like I had been there all along, resting, broken, lost in my grief. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. Silence followed, thick and suffocating, and I held my breath without realizing it, my eyes locked on the handle, waiting, fearing, expecting it to turn at any second. And then came the knock, firm, controlled, not too loud, not too soft, just enough to demand attention without raising alarm. "Are you awake?" My brother's voice called from the other side, and something twisted painfully inside me at how normal he sounded, how unchanged, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just been downstairs discussing something that shattered everything I believed about him. I forced myself to respond, my voice slightly weak, slightly tired, but steady enough to sound believable. "Yes, I'm awake." There was a brief pause, as if he was considering something, as if he was deciding what to do next, and I clenched the fabric in my hands tightly, waiting, hopping, praying that he wouldn't push further, that he wouldn't ask more questions I wasn't ready to answer. "Did you come downstairs just now?" he asked finally, his tone casual on the surface but carrying a subtle sharpness underneath, and my heart nearly stopped at the question because it was direct, too direct, and for a split second I couldn't speak, couldn't even think of a response, my mind blanking under the pressure, but then instinct took over, survival guiding me where logic failed, and I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. "No," I said quickly, forcing a slight confusion into my voice. "I've been here, I couldn't sleep." Another pause followed, longer this time, heavier, and I could almost feel him standing there, analyzing my words, weighing them, searching for any hint of dishonesty, and I held my breath again, my entire body tense as I waited for his response. And after what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. "All right," he said, his tone unreadable now. "Get some rest." His footsteps moved away slowly after that, but I didn't relax, I didn't move. I didn't even breathe properly until I was sure he was gone, until the silence returned again. And even then, the fear didn't leave. It only settled deeper, more quietly, more dangerously, because I knew something had changed. I knew they had heard something, even if they weren't certain what. And that uncertainty would make them more careful, more alert, more dangerous than before. My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand, and I looked down quickly, my fingers trembling as I unlocked it, my eyes scanning the new message that had appeared, and my breath caught as I read the words. "They suspect something. Be careful now. You don't get another chance." I stared at the message until the words blurred together, my fingers tightening around the phone as if holding it firmly could somehow steady the storm rising inside me. But nothing felt steady anymore. Nothing felt certain. And the realization that I had come so close to being caught replayed in my mind over and over again, each time more terrifying than the last, because I could still hear the shift in their voices, still feel the tension in the air when they realized someone might have been listening. And I knew that if I had been even a second slower, even a little less careful, everything would have ended right there. My body slowly relaxed against the bed, but it wasn't relief. It was exhaustion creeping in, heavy and unavoidable, pressing down on me after hours of fear and tension. And I closed my eyes for a moment, just a moment, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to make sense of everything I had learned. But the more I thought about it, the more tangled it became, because nothing about this situation followed any logic I understood. Nothing fit into the world I had lived in until yesterday. And I felt like I had been pushed into a completely different reality without warning, without preparation. My husband was alive, somewhere, hidden, controlled, or maybe even trapped. My own brother was involved in something he shouldn't have been part of. My father-in-law was not the grieving man I thought he was, and I was standing right in the middle of it all without knowing why, without knowing what they wanted from me, and that question began to grow louder in my mind. What was my role in all of this? Why was I still here? Why hadn't they done something already if I was such a risk? And the only answer that made sense was the most frightening one. They still needed me for something. The thought sent a chill through my entire body, and I sat up slowly, my breathing uneven as I tried to think clearly. Because if they needed me, then I had time, but time didn't mean safety, it only meant delay. And I couldn't afford to wait for whatever they were planning to unfold. I couldn't just sit here and react. I needed to understand. I needed to get ahead of them somehow, even if I didn't know how yet. My eyes drifted around the room, searching for anything that might help, anything I might have missed, any clue that could connect to what I had already discovered. And my gaze stopped at the bedside table again, now empty of the envelope and photograph I had burned. And a deep sense of regret hit me suddenly, sharp and painful, because I had destroyed the only physical proof I had, the only evidence that something was wrong. And now all I had were memories and messages from a number I couldn't even trace. And if those messages stopped, if he stopped contacting me, I would be completely alone in this, with no way to prove any of it to anyone. My phone felt heavier in my hand as that thought settled in, and I looked down at it again, my thumb hovering over the screen as I debated whether to send another message, whether to ask more questions, demand more answers. But a part of me hesitated, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of drawing attention, afraid that even this line of communication might not be as safe as I wanted to believe. And yet I couldn't stay silent, not when everything inside me was screaming for clarity. I typed slowly, carefully, choosing each word as if it carried weight, as if it could change something beyond my control. Why are they doing this? What do they want from me? I stared at the message for a moment before sending it, my heart pounding with a strange mix of fear and anticipation. And as soon as it delivered, I felt that familiar tension settle in again. The waiting, the uncertainty, the helplessness of not knowing when or if a reply would come. And I placed the phone beside me, forcing myself to look away, to breathe, to think about something else. But it was impossible. My mind kept circling back to the same questions, the same fears, the same unknowns that refused to let me rest. Minutes passed slowly, stretching into something that felt much longer, and just as I began to wonder if there would be no reply this time, the phone buzzed again, sharp and sudden, making me flinch slightly as I grabbed it quickly, my eyes scanning the screen with urgency. "It's not you, it's what you have." I frowned immediately, confusion mixing with fear as I read the message again, trying to understand what it meant, because I didn't have anything. I had burned the letter, the photograph. I hadn't kept anything that could be important, and my fingers moved quickly as I typed back. "I don't have anything. I destroyed it like you said." The reply came almost instantly this time, and the words sent a deeper chill through me than anything before. "Not that. Something else. Think." I froze, my breath catching as my mind raced, trying to understand, trying to find what he was referring to. Something I had, something they wanted, something important enough to fake a death, to involve my own family, to put me in danger without even telling me why. And I looked around the room again, slower this time, more carefully, as if seeing it for the first time, searching every corner, every object, every detail that might hold meaning I hadn't noticed before. My eyes moved to the cupboard, to the shelves, to the small things scattered across the room, and then they stopped. A memory surfaced suddenly, sharp and clear, something small, something I had almost forgotten in the chaos of everything that had happened, something he had given me just a few days before his supposed death, something he had insisted I keep safe, something I hadn't questioned at the time because it had seemed so simple, so insignificant. My heart began to race again as I stood up slowly, my gaze fixed on the corner of the room where I had placed it, untouched, unnoticed until now, and I walked toward it carefully, my steps slow, deliberate, as if I was approaching something that could change everything. It was still there, exactly where I had left it. A small, ordinary-looking box, nothing special at first glance, nothing that would draw attention, nothing that would suggest it held anything important, and yet now, as I stared at it, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet certainty that this was what they wanted. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for it, my fingers brushing against its surface, and for a moment I hesitated because opening it meant stepping further into whatever this was. It meant leaving behind any remaining chance of ignorance, any illusion of normalcy, and I knew deep down that once I opened it, there would be no turning back. My phone buzzed again in my other hand, and I looked at the screen without taking my eyes off the box. "Don't open it there." My breath caught. My hand froze just inches above the box, my fingers suspended in the air as the message sank into me, heavy and urgent, and I slowly pulled my hand back as if the object itself had suddenly become dangerous to touch, as if it were no longer just a simple thing he had given me but something far more significant, something that carried weight I hadn't understood until now. And I swallowed hard, my throat dry as my eyes remained fixed on it, my mind racing with questions that refused to settle. "Don't open it there." The words echoed again and again, and I turned slightly, my gaze shifting around the room, suddenly aware of every corner, every shadow, every possible place where someone could be watching. Because if this box was important enough for all of this, for fake deaths, for whispered conversations, for warnings and threats, then there was no way it wasn't being watched, no way I was the only one who knew where it was. A cold realization crept into my thoughts, slow and terrifying, and I stepped back from the box, my heart beating faster as I considered the possibility that they already knew, that they were waiting for me to make a move, waiting for me to reveal what I knew without even realizing it, and I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to steady the sudden wave of unease that washed over me. I needed to think. I needed to be careful. I couldn't rush into this blindly. My eyes moved toward the door again, and for a moment I imagined it opening suddenly, someone stepping inside, their gaze going straight to the box, confirming everything I had just realized, and the image was enough to push me into action, because staying here with it felt wrong now, dangerous in a way I couldn't ignore. I picked up my phone again, my fingers trembling slightly as I typed quickly. Where should I take it? The message sent, and I didn't have to wait long this time, the reply coming almost immediately as if he had been expecting the question. Not outside. Too risky. Find a place in the house where no one goes. I frowned slightly at that, my mind instantly scanning through the layout of the house, searching for somewhere isolated, somewhere forgotten, somewhere I could go without raising suspicion. And it didn't take long for one place to surface in my thoughts. A small storage room at the far end of the hallway, rarely used, mostly filled with old furniture and boxes no one had touched in years. A place people avoided because it was dusty, cramped, and unimportant, which made it perfect. My heart pounded as I made the decision, because this wasn't just about moving an object anymore. This was about stepping deeper into something I barely understood. And I knew I had to be careful. I had to make sure no one saw me, no one followed me, no one even suspected what I was doing, because if they did, I didn't know what would happen, but I knew it wouldn't be anything good. I glanced at the door one last time before moving, listening carefully for any sound outside, any indication that someone might be nearby. But everything seemed quiet for now, and I took a slow breath, steadying myself before walking back toward the box, my movements more deliberate this time, more controlled, and I reached down and picked it up, surprised at how light it felt in my hands, as if it held nothing at all, as if all the weight came from what it meant rather than what it actually was. I held it close to me, instinctively protective, and I moved toward the door, unlocking it slowly, carefully, making sure the sound was as soft as possible, and I opened it just enough to look outside, my eyes scanning the hallway quickly, my heart racing as I checked for any sign of movement, but it was empty, silent, and I stepped out quietly, closing the door behind me without a sound. Each step down the hallway felt heavier than the last, my senses heightened, my awareness stretched thin as I listened for anything unusual, any sign that I wasn't alone, and I kept my gaze forward, resisting the urge to look back too often, because I knew that nervousness could draw attention just as easily as noise, and I needed to appear normal, or at least as normal as I could in a situation like this. The storage room door stood at the far end, slightly worn, rarely touched, and I moved toward it steadily, my grip tightening slightly around the box as I reached it, and I paused for a moment, listening again, making sure no one was nearby, before slowly pushing the door open and stepping inside. The air in the room was stale, carrying the faint scent of dust and old wood, and the dim light filtering through the small window barely illuminated the cluttered space, making it feel even more isolated, more hidden, and I closed the door behind me, the soft click echoing quietly in the silence. And for a moment, I just stood there, holding the box, my heart pounding as I realized that this was it. This was the moment where everything would begin to make sense, or fall apart completely. My phone buzzed again in my hand, and I looked down quickly, my breath catching as I read the new message. "Now open it." My fingers tightened around the box as I lowered myself slowly onto an old wooden chair, my movements careful, almost hesitant, because this felt final in a way I couldn't explain, like crossing a line I wouldn't be able to step back from, and I placed the box in my lap, staring at it for a long moment as my thoughts raced, my emotions tangled between fear and determination. Then, with a slow, trembling breath, I opened it. Inside, there was no explosion of answers, no immediate clarity, just a few small, ordinary-looking items placed carefully within. But something about them felt deliberate, meaningful, and I leaned closer, my eyes scanning each piece as my heart continued to race. A small USB drive, a folded piece of paper, and a ring I had never seen before. My hands trembled as I reached for the paper first, unfolding it slowly, my breath catching as I saw his handwriting again, unmistakable, familiar, and my eyes moved quickly across the words written there. "If you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you the truth myself. Everything you need to know is in the drive. But be careful. Once you see it, you can't unknow it, and they will do anything to stop you." My chest tightened as I read the last line again, my fingers gripping the paper slightly as the weight of it settled in. Because this wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a confirmation that whatever was inside that USB was the reason for everything, the reason for the lies, the reason for the danger, the reason I was now standing here alone, holding something that could change everything. My phone buzzed once more, and I looked down at the screen, my heart pounding harder than ever as I read the message that followed. "Do not plug it in here." My grip tightened instinctively around the USB drive as I read the message, my pulse quickening once again, because just when I thought I had finally reached something solid, something I could act on, another warning pulled me back. Another invisible boundary placed itself in front of me, and I realized with a growing sense of unease that every step forward in this truth came with another layer of caution, another reminder that I was surrounded by something far more controlled than I had imagined. Do not plug it in here. The words felt heavier this time, more serious, as if this was not just a suggestion but a rule I couldn't afford to break, and I looked around the storage room slowly, my eyes scanning the old shelves, the dusty corners, the forgotten furniture, and it struck me then. This house, every part of it, every room, every wall, might already be compromised in ways I couldn't see, ways I couldn't understand, and the thought made my chest tighten as I carefully placed the USB back into the box. My movements slower now, more deliberate, as if even handling it carried risk. I folded the paper again, my fingers brushing over his handwriting one more time, holding on to that small piece of him, that proof that he was still out there, still trying to guide me, still trusting me with something that clearly mattered more than anything else, and a quiet determination began to form beneath the fear. Something steady, something stronger than the panic that had been controlling me until now, because I understood one thing clearly. Whatever this was, whatever truth was hidden in that drive, it was worth everything that had happened so far, and if he trusted me with it, then I couldn't afford to break under the pressure now. My eyes shifted to the ring lying quietly in the box, almost overlooked in the intensity of everything else, and I picked it up slowly, turning it between my fingers as I studied it more closely, noticing the fine details etched into its surface, subtle patterns that didn't seem purely decorative, as if they held meaning, as if they were more than just design, and I frowned slightly, trying to place it, trying to understand why it was there, because this didn't feel random. Nothing about this was random anymore, and the more I looked at it, the more it felt like a key to something I hadn't discovered yet. My phone remained silent for a moment, and I took that as a sign to think, to process, to prepare for what came next, because I couldn't stay hidden in this room forever. I couldn't keep this box here where it could be found, and I couldn't risk anyone seeing me with it. And the weight of those decisions pressed down on me as I carefully placed the ring back into the box and closed it slowly, my fingers lingering on the lid for just a second before I pulled my hand away. I needed a plan. I needed to move carefully now. The house no longer felt like a place I could trust, not even for a moment, and the realization settled heavily inside me as I stood up from the chair, holding the box close again, my mind racing with possibilities, trying to find a way to keep this safe, to keep myself safe, without drawing attention, without making a mistake that could expose everything. Just as I turned toward the door, my phone buzzed again, breaking through my thoughts sharply, and I looked down immediately, my breath catching as I read the new message. "You need to leave the house." My heart skipped a beat. Leave. The word felt impossible, dangerous, because leaving meant stepping out into the unknown. It meant risking being seen, being followed, being stopped, and I felt a surge of hesitation rise inside me, because as unsafe as this house had become, it was still familiar, still contained, still something I understood in some small way, but outside was unpredictable. I typed back quickly, my fingers trembling slightly. "I can't just leave. They'll notice." The reply came almost instantly, as if he had already anticipated my resistance. "Then make them believe you have a reason." I froze, reading that line again, and my mind began to turn, slowly at first, then faster, searching for something believable, something natural, something that wouldn't raise suspicion, and a thought came to me, simple but effective, something that fit the situation perfectly. I was a widow now, grieving, broken. It wouldn't be strange if I needed space, if I wanted to visit somewhere quiet, somewhere meaningful, somewhere no one would question. My chest tightened slightly at the realization, because even this, even my grief, was now becoming a tool, something to be used rather than felt, and I swallowed hard, pushing the emotion down as I focused on what needed to be done. I looked down at the box in my hands, then around the room one last time, making sure I hadn't left anything behind, any sign that I had been here for something more than a moment of solitude. And then I moved toward the door, my steps careful but more certain now, because hesitation would only make things worse. I opened the door slowly, listening for any sound outside, any sign of movement, but the hallway remained quiet, and I stepped out, closing the door behind me as softly as I could, my heart still beating fast but steadier than before, because now I had direction, now I had something to do, something to focus on beyond fear. As I walked back toward my room, the box held close to my side, my mind began to prepare for what came next. For the moment I would have to face them again, look them in the eyes, speak normally, act as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't just uncovered a truth that could destroy everything. And the thought made my chest tighten, but I pushed forward anyway, because I knew there was no other choice now. My phone buzzed one last time as I reached my door, and I paused briefly, glancing down at the screen before going inside. Be careful who you trust outside, too. This isn't just inside the house. I closed the door behind me quietly, locking it with deliberate care, and for the first time in hours, I allowed myself a brief moment to breathe, though the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on me like a living thing, relentless and unyielding. The box rested in my lap once again, the USB, the paper, the ring, each item carrying a significance I still could not fully grasp. But I understood instinctively that the answers to everything, the truth about my husband, the lies my family had woven, the danger surrounding me, were all contained somewhere within that small collection, and that knowledge brought with it both resolve and fear, an impossible mixture that left my hands shaking even as I tried to steady myself. I sat there in the dim light of my room, listening carefully to the silence outside, each creak of the house, each faint hum of the world beyond, and I realized that leaving this place, stepping out into the unpredictable, was not just necessary. It was inevitable, because staying meant being trapped, confined at the mercy of forces I barely understood, and I would never forgive myself if I allowed them to control me any longer. I glanced at the paper again, reading his words one more time, tracing the lines with my fingers, memorizing them as if they were a lifeline. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you the truth myself. Everything you need to know is in the drive. But be careful. Once you see it, you can't unknow it, and they will do anything to stop you. The warning sank deep into me, heavier than before, and I understood fully that this was not a casual danger, not something that could be ignored. Every decision from this point on would carry risk, and yet there was no turning back. The choice was mine alone, and if I faltered, the consequences would be absolute. I reached for the USB drive slowly, handling it as though it were fragile, though I knew its fragility was only perceived, not real. The real danger was in the knowledge it contained, in the power it represented, and I understood instinctively that whatever I discovered could change everything for everyone involved, and that both my family and my husband's enemies would move swiftly if I made a mistake. My hands hovered over my laptop, already open and waiting, my mind calculating, planning, imagining every possible outcome, and I felt a surge of determination rise, quiet but undeniable, because fear could only carry me so far, and survival demanded action, demanded focus, demanded clarity. I plugged the drive in carefully, holding my breath as the computer recognized it, and for a moment the screen blinked, loaded, and I saw files, countless files, documents, images, videos, and my heart raced even faster, each one a piece of a puzzle I had yet to assemble. And yet I sensed immediately that the first file, the one labeled with my husband's name, was the one I had to open first, the one that would set everything in motion. As I clicked it, the screen flickered briefly, and then the footage began. My husband's voice, alive, shaking, urgent, addressing me directly, explaining in painstaking detail what had happened, why he had been forced into hiding, the betrayal he had uncovered, the danger we were both in, and the secrets that had stretched across generations, tying my family to forces I could barely comprehend. My breath caught repeatedly as I watched, as I listened, as the reality I had been trying to piece together finally fell into place, brutal, raw, undeniable. And I felt my heart both break and strengthen at the same time, because though the truth was terrifying, though it carried consequences I could not yet imagine, it was real, and I was alive, and I could act. Hours passed as I watched, absorbing, remembering, learning, understanding the depth of manipulation, deceit, and danger. Each revelation a knife twisting, yet also a key, a way forward if I could be careful enough, clever enough, resilient enough to survive it. By the time the final video ended, my eyes were burning, my mind exhausted, yet something inside me had shifted irreversibly. I was no longer simply the widow of a man I thought I had lost, no longer simply the victim of circumstance. no longer simply a pawn in someone else's game. I was aware, awake, armed with knowledge, with purpose, with the truth, and the fear that had ruled me for days transformed slowly into determination, a quiet but undeniable strength that settled in my chest like iron. I gathered the USB, the paper, and the ring carefully, securing them back in the box, my hands steady now, my mind focused, because the next step was clear. I had to leave the house, I had to move beyond these walls, I had to step into the unknown with caution, precision, and intent, and I would do so without hesitation, because every moment of fear that had come before had prepared me for this. As I stepped toward the door, I felt the weight of the past days, of the lies, of the danger. And yet I also felt the surge of life, of agency, of control that had been missing until now. And I understood fully that what awaited me outside, in the world that had seemed so ordinary and safe before, was nothing compared to the storm I had just stepped through, and I was ready. I opened the door slowly, carefully, listening to the silence in the hallway, feeling the house hold its breath with me. And then I stepped out, my hands gripping the box, my mind sharp, my senses alive. And as I moved toward freedom, toward action, toward the unknown, I felt for the first time in days that I was no longer just surviving. I was taking the first steps toward reclaiming my life, toward facing the truth, toward ensuring that the shadows that had haunted me, that had manipulated me, that had tried to control me, would no longer dictate my fate. And with that thought, I walked steadily into the waiting world beyond, ready to confront whatever lay ahead, fully aware, fully alive, and finally, truly in control of my own story.